Hello again. We are looking at some examples of contour line drawings done in Adobe Illustrator based on photographs. So the instructional tutorial I'm going to show you here is going to walk you through how you can get to this point. Now the handout we will be following is right down here. Whoops. Alright, so there are a couple of links in the handout. One will take you to a slideshow of prior student examples. Another has a slideshow for contour line examples from artists and art history. Alright, so I'm going to leave those for you guys to explore independently when you open the handout. What we want to do is first create a letter size document in Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so I'll go ahead and go to File, New, and I'm going to look for letter. I think that is equivalent to letter, but if I go to print, I can pick it by name. I also like to look at things in inches, not points, so I'll change that to inches. So 8.5 by 11, that's what we want. So contour line demo, or DOM, demo, there we go. So I've made a new document, and it's the right size. The next step says to go to Windows Workspace Essentials Classic. Some of you may be working in a workspace that looks like this. Okay, the standard Essentials workspace, I'm not really a big fan of it. Even when you reset it, it doesn't show me enough windows for me to be happy. So if you go to Window Workspace and go to Essentials Classic, which is the prior default setting, you'll end up with something like this. And you can expand your windows so you can see your colors, your swatches, your brushes, your stroke weight, all of those things, and your layers all in one go. I really do prefer this method. So the way you get there, Window, Workspace, Essentials Classic, or you can hit this little box up here and pick it from the drop-down list. So the next step is going to ask me to place an image. So you go to File, Place, or you do the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-P, and then you'll browse for your photograph. You can see here in the handout there's some pictures, small pictures of me in a folder. That's what I'm going to browse for. I'm going to go to File, Place, whoops, went too far, Place, and then if I go to my Documents folder and look in the HoverCam Flex, that's the desktop camera that I have. You guys could actually use your laptops to take a picture, or you can just browse through other photos you might have. I took a series of self-portraits using the camera that I have. I'll go ahead and choose this last one, image 10. Alright, so I'm going to click one time just somewhere on the page, and that'll bring the picture in. The picture is very, very big. Okay, so I don't need it to stay this big. I am going to right click on it and tell it to transform scale. Now I want this to be immediately smaller. I think 50% or 25% is a good measure. So I'll go ahead and do a 25% smaller picture. That's a little too small, but that's okay. It's enough to get me started. Then I can shift click and drag the corners to make it larger, and I want it to be big enough to fill most of the page, but I'm not going to keep the photo visible through the entire image, so I think maybe I'll just scale this up to get the most out of my face. Then they do have an option up here called crop image. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it gives me a little warning. Cropping a linked image embeds the file into the original, and the original file linked is not affected. Well, that's great news, because I don't want to change the original image. I just want to look at less of it. So when I click OK, it's going to present me with a crop box. I'm just going to click and drag. I'll zoom out a bit so I can grab the other side, and click and drag this little marquee box to the dimensions of my artboard. Then if I hit the apply button up here, it's cropped it and made the change. That makes me happy. Okay, I have my image in, it's cropped to the size that I want. Now the next step is going to tell me to lock that selection. So if I use the select tool, the letter V, and then press Control 2, that will lock the photograph down. So I will go to the select tool, just click on the image, and then go to Object Lock Selection. Now, Control 2 is your keyboard shortcut. It's a good one to use. I'm going to click the lock selection button, and then when I unpack the layer, I only have the photo, but you can see it's got a little padlock icon next to it. Now I'm going to prep my pencil, pen, or curvature tool for use. I like to use the pencil for this. If I press the letter N, it activates the pencil. I'll go ahead and draw something real quick. Now that pencil stroke does exist, but it has no filler stroke. That's something I'm not really a fan of. So I need to set this up so that it will give me a fill and stroke. Now I can press the letter D to give it the default white fill, black stroke weight, but that's also not really going to work for me because I don't want a fill color. Okay, so I'll choose none for my fill color. And then I'm going to double click the pencil tool because I want it to do a couple of things. Either smooth out if I have an unsteady hand or be more accurate. Okay, I usually lean toward the accurate one. We want it to fill new pencil strokes. It does not need to keep selected. I'm not a fan of editing selected paths or really closing paths. Okay, so I am going to click OK. Now, if I draw a line, you can see that line's coming in black. Now, I have some areas in my hair and beard and clothing where black's going to be difficult to see. So what I'm going to suggest to you, let's use the selection tool and delete this. I'm going to suggest that we choose a stroke color either here or here or here that is bright and will stand out. So I'm going to choose kind of a bright greenish blue. That really doesn't appear anywhere in my image. So N for the pencil tool, and I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to focus. I always like to start with this on the eyes. Okay, so I'm going to do a circular shape around my pupil, and then I'm just going to kind of look at the other areas in the face. So I'll get the rest of my iris, and then I'm going to start looking at the folds of my skin, and I'm just going to try to trace those fairly faithfully. It's okay if it's not perfect, because we are fine with subtle imperfections. In fact, I think it makes the image more interesting the longer you can create a continuous line. Alright, so I'm going to kind of look at the areas in my image where there is definition. Okay, I see like a little zigzag there. I'll go ahead and define that. Alright, going over to the other eye, I'm going to create a circular drawing around the pupil and one around what I can see from the iris. I can't see the entire thing, and I'm not going to stop with my drawing yet. I'm actually going to go around and collect all these little lines that I can see in my face, and then I'll let go. So you can see in the layers window, I'll drag it out so you can see it, my layers are really piling up. If I hide the eyeball next to my image, you can see what I have so far. Okay, but I want to go through here and try to draw around. Remember, I'm not worried about the shading. Now there will be lines that are defined where light and dark areas meet, but again, I'm not super concerned about those at the moment. I'm just drawing where the contours are. Right? I have a contour here where my nostril is. There's a bit of a contour up here in my eyebrow. Okay, I'm going to just kind of trace around those things. And if I see the edge between my face and my facial hair, I will define that. Same thing down here. We'll trace that up along the edge. Okay, now you don't need to do a continuous line drawing, but the more continuous lines you create, the more energy I feel that it has, and I think those tend to be more powerful images when you use more long lines. So I have some different wrinkles and things happening in my face. I have this highlight running down the side of my nose. I'm going to go ahead and get that. All right, I have the separation between my upper and lower lip. I'm going to go around there. All right, I have some areas here where you can kind of see through my facial hair. I'm going to go ahead and define each of those as best I can. Now ears are kind of funny. They're something that everybody's has a different shape, and when you look really closely there are a ton of kind of intersecting and weaving lines in here, so I'm going to try to get those in as much of a continuous line as I can. Again, I just like the energy that it has, but if I missed one like this one here, I'll just go back and recollect it, draw it again. Alright, now the hair is very interesting because you're going to have to make some creative license, kind of artistic choices. I have a little bit of hair that's like poking out on the edges. I'm not going to define each individual hair. I'm just going to kind of trace around the outside of where I feel like the hair is poking through. I'm going to get more of a kind of movement-based representation of that. Alright, and when I feel like I've traced enough, I'll just let go of my mouse. Because again, this is all happening with the stroke. There are no fill colors to be concerned about, so I don't have to worry too much about making anything solid. I'm really just concerned about catching, I guess, the feeling of the hair being present. So I may go back in after this is done and try to create, I guess grain is a good way to think of it. You know, I have a couple of gray hairs here in my beard. I like to grab those and kind of trace around those to give myself a sense of where things are falling. Okay, I can come back through here and trace these little curvature shapes, because that's going to give, whoops, I'm not a really big fan of that straight line. Maybe I'll grab my eraser tool and touch that up real quick. And I'll pick up with this one again, N for the pencil tool. Okay, but let's go to the bottom of our layer, hide the image. It's coming together pretty well. All right, so I have some other contours I see kind of in my face that I didn't capture. All right, there's one kind of here around the outside. And remember, I can always hide these later if I don't like them. All right, looking at the lower section, I might go ahead and define the dark areas, just kind of loosely. Come up in here and define some of those grayer areas where there's a highlight or a shadow. Alright, so the other thing is folds in clothing. Those are oftentimes things that you'll want to draw, because we're worried about line in this. We're not so much worried about light or dark, but when light or dark is present, we're going to represent it with a line. So I'm going to go ahead and trace loosely around this edge here, come down and follow that, and anytime I'm on a good line, I'm just going to follow it out to the end. If there's lines that I miss, I'll go back and get those. Okay, and I will try my best to represent them faithfully, but it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. In fact, the imperfections in the lines that you create give a nice energy to the overall drawing. Alright, so let me start up at the top of this line in the collar. Maybe I'll follow this down and I will trace where it is a contrast between light and dark. And it's okay to come down off of your page some. Okay, I'm going to come back to these little zigzag things in the zipper later on. I'm going to go ahead and trace out the shoulder, come back up that seam line in the fabric, back down again along the collar, and here I'm just going to make little zigzaggy kind of imperfections. I don't think it's going to be something I want to trace 100% accurately. I think just more important is getting the energy of the irregularity of this line. And I'll come back up the side of the seam on the zipper, go back down the stitching lines, and then come back up to the top of the fabric. Alright, there's a few others that I forgot, so I'll get those. And you can see if I have like a wiggly kind of line, the computer program does its best to kind of straighten it out. That's what the difference in my pencil settings were. If I double click here and I go to accurate, it will be far less likely to fix a wobbly line. But if you really want help, you can ask it to smooth things out. And then if I were to do, let's see, if I do this jagged line, let's see how it represents that with smooth. Not too bad. In fact, if I zoom in, it actually looks a little bit like it more just kind of made it all angles. So that's one of the reasons I'm more of a fan of being closer to accurate in the pencil tool settings. Again, to get to those, just double click your pencil. Okay. But if you want to go really close and try to faithfully execute every notch in the zipper, you can. And we'll see what the computer program does when we are finished. Again, for this one, I'm going to go ahead and just let it be what it is. That's okay. I think I can live with that. A couple of other lines in the fabric. Maybe a little hint of a line here. I see a far side of the shoulder I didn't represent. So So I'll come back and get that. And maybe I'll get the rest of those little fabric lines there. Give a little hint to the bend in the fabric there. There's a little bit of a separation here where the shadow falls. Again, I'm not coloring it in, I'm just recognizing its presence and then creating some lines to represent where those folds go. Now, I'm going to press Control A, and what that does, it selects every single path line that I have made, and it selects everything on my layer except for my locked image. Now this is good because I'm then going to press Control G or go to Object Group. Now I only have, instead of all those separate lines, I have basically two things happening in my layer, the photo and the line work. So this is what we want to go for. I'm going to press Control S to save it. Definitely want to save to the Creative Cloud. I'm not ready to export yet though, because there's another part of my handout that I want to play with, and that is trying on different brushes. So I'm going to select, with my selection tool, the group that I made. Now remember, we had this temporary color, which I can now change back to black, and I have all these different options. I can increase my stroke weight, I can ask my stroke to have different end points. It can end in a rounded point or a projected cap. I can ask for arrowheads on the end, although those are a bit big. I think I'll go with no arrowheads. And let me knock that back down to 1 point. There's also different brush profiles and brush strokes. So some of them start and end in a taper. So if I choose that, as I increase my stroke size, it becomes a little bit more obvious what is happening here. Oh, I think 8 might be a little excessive, but let's drop it down to 3. See if we like the look of that. I do like the look of that. So what I'm recommending that you guys do is when you have a version that you like, go ahead and export it as a JPEG. So I'll tell it to use the artboards, contour line demo V1. I'm going to make a couple of different versions of this. Now it's going into the wrong folder. I'm going to go to my desktop and find my folder. And I'm only really doing this for the JPEGs or PNG files that I'm exporting. I'm always in favor of you guys saving to the Adobe Cloud. It's just easier when we have to share computers in a lab. Okay, so this is one version that I have with my lines, but there's so many other options. So I could try on any of these different brush tips. Some of them start fat and end thin. Some of them are a little more chiseled. Okay. Then there are other options entirely. If I select my group and click the drop-down menu for the brushes, there are some that are kind of like a marker where it's thin on verticals and then fat on horizontals. There's some oval tips. There's some that look like studio art materials. That one's kind of fun. Let me knock that down to a 0.5 view and show it to you unselected. That almost looks like it was done with a pencil. So I like that one. I'm going to go ahead and export as, okay, line demo V2 for version number 2. And again, just max out your quality. High resolution is good. Now, there's a few more ones that I want to explore. So I'm going to hit one of these artistic subfolders here, and I'll look at calligraphy. Okay, this is interesting because once you get this library open, you can see, whew, that's a 50-point brush, way too big. 30, still too big. But these, much more manageable. Okay, 5-point, 3-point, and even 1-point. So if I look at a 3-point flat, that looks like it was done maybe with a fountain pen. Now, if I press the side-to-side arrow, it will load other libraries, or I can click and drag and go to maybe the charcoal pencil library, or the artistic ink library. And again, some of these may end up giving too much of a large line, in which case I might need to go to something underneath 1 point, like 0.5 or even 0.25. Pretty fun, okay? So I want you guys to create a nice drawing, but then explore what options you have under the various brush tips, because they can all have a little bit of a different personality and style, okay? from paintbrushes to calligraphy pens, all sorts of different things. So I'm going to go through here, take a look at what I have. Ooh, this one's fun. A little wild, a little big. I don't know how much smaller I can make this. What if I did 0.025? There we go. Now that's actually so small I can't really see it. What if I do 0.05? I have to really zoom in to see the multiple lines that make that up. But again, this is something for you guys to experiment with and see what you like. Again, 1 point is a good default, but some of the brushes are just going to be, it's going to be too much. All right? So you'll have to play with what's working for you. Also, there are dashed lines and dotted lines and all sorts of different fun things to explore. So I invite you guys to kind of poke around in there and see what you find. Okay? The bristle brushes are pretty nice. So again, look and see. Ooh, that's a little too thick. But I do kind of like this one. So I'm going to take this image and go to File, Export, Export As. This will be my third variation, version 3. Okay, so again, I'm going to just save my scene. And now I have 3 variations on the single design, and we're good to go.